What should Christians do when it comes to people saying the church is irrelevant? Now, if you've been watching what the world is doing out there, it's becoming more and more over the top. What happens when you overstimulate people, whether they're in the world or the church? So we want to be relevant, so now we're swinging from the chandeliers. And then people say, yeah, but you're only swinging from the chandeliers. Okay, now we're going to swing from the rafters. And now we're going to parachute down onto the stage because we're so desperate to be relevant. Well, good morning and welcome to Timeout this morning. My name is Jack Vint. I trust where you are. It's a bit cold where I am, that you're warm, that you're safe, and that you got a hot cup of coffee with you this morning. Thank you for joining me. Now, I've been asking the questions, what should Christians do in various situations? This morning, I want to ask, what should Christians do when it comes to people saying the church is irrelevant? And then I want to ask, do you think that the church is relevant? And why would you say that? I'm going to say some very interesting things that may shock you a little bit later, so don't go away. But before I do, can I ask you, if you're listening this morning, what do you think? Is the church relevant, or do you think it's irrelevant today? And tell me why you say what you say. I want to hear your opinion. You don't have to be afraid to think somebody's going to shut you down. You have a right to an opinion. It'll be good to hear what you say. Now, if you've been watching what the world is doing out there, it's becoming more and more over the top. Before I share something, I want to share a story. Many years ago, I went on a missionary trip to Zambia, and I stayed in a very basic hotel. There weren't many good hotels anyway. And there was this little portable TV. So when I was finished, I thought, let me turn on the TV and see, what do they show in Zambia? And I was quite shocked because, they had the news and there was no drama. They had no channels of anxiety. And even the news, the highlight was a golf game, and not a fantastic golf course, but they gave about 5 minutes to this golf tournament. And then I think back on South Africa today, when you turn on the news, not that anybody watches the news anymore, they watch social media. But, it's about, in South Africa, it's about crime, it's about corruption. Most of it done by our politicians that are supposedly here to serve us. So people get stressed out to say, enough, I don't want to hear about it. Even if it's the truth, I don't want to hear about it anymore. And I'm going to tell you what that is in a moment. But even when you watch that ding dong or dingbat Taylor Swift, she's over the top now because she wants to people are expecting more and more crazy things to like you and to become famous. Even Mission Impossible, if you watched the first one, there were a few stunts. The last one I went to watch, it was over the top. Even I got anxious because it was just so unbelievable. And I guess the reason is the audience expects more. And I'm going to say about what happens when you overstimulate people, whether they're in the world or the church. Now, it's difficult to compete if you're in the church with what's happening in the world. There's so many glamorous things you may think. And then many years ago, when things happened like, people were killed in wars or a war broke out, everybody went onto their knees and they prayed and they asked God to help the world. Now nobody really cares because it's happening so many times. And I want to explain what that is in a moment. Now, then I'm going to come to, is the church still relevant today? And you can then judge whether your answer is in line with what I'm saying or not. It's fine. I don't expect you to change your answer. Now, I call this tendency in the world to just drive us, I call it emotionally anesthetized. When you're anesthetized, and I hope it never happened to you, but if you've ever gone in for an operation or to a hospital, they give you an anesthetic, they anesthetize you because they don't want you to feel the pain. And that's exactly emotional. When they emotionally anesthetize you, the world or what's happening is you become numb. You become detached. It's like a coping mechanism because of trauma or something difficult in your life. And I think many people are, because we are bombarded with so many things on social media, to a point where we say, we don't want to hear any more of scandals. We don't want to hear of the government plotting to undermine us. We don't want to hear about corrupt politicians. We don't want to hear about the world's going to end tomorrow. Just tell us some good news. And we switch off. We emotionally become anesthetized, which is a very dangerous thing. We don't feel anything anymore. And we lose our greatest human quality, emotions and empathy for people and things happening around us. And so, how does that look in the church? You know, the church should be three things, I believe. They should be real, they should be relevant, and they should be relational. Now, everybody says the church should be relevant. It's great. Yes, we should be. But not at the expense of being real and relational. And when we think about relevant, you think, what does that mean? I call that, once you overstimulate someone, it's very difficult to top it. And let me explain maybe in a practical way. People that take drugs, they start with mild stuff, maybe it's cannabis, then it doesn't give them enough kick, so they progress to harder drugs because it's not working. They're overstimulated. That's how they get hooked. And it's very much the same when it comes to, pornography. People that participate in pornography and relationships, they destroy their relationships because they get overstimulated, and when they're there with their own wives or husbands, they no longer see them as good enough because they've now watched pornography. That's why it's so destructive in relationships. I'm using this to show you that when we overstimulate people, it's not a good thing, even in the church. So we want to be relevant, so now we're swinging from the chandeliers. And then people say, yeah, but you're only swinging from the chandeliers. Okay, now we're going to swing from the rafters, and now we're going to parachute down onto the stage because we're so desperate to be relevant. But I also believe that it's not just about being relevant, it's also about being real. People want things that are real. With AI, they're bringing things where elephants are walking on minis and then they've got a bird on their head. It's not real, but it looks so real. It's very difficult if it's not real. And then also we can't be relevant if we're not relational. Relational is what Jesus came to restore in our lives. And so I believe that's really what the church should be. And when we get into gimmicks, as I call them, it's very difficult to keep people's interest eventually. And if we're competing with what the world is doing, there's wars, there's crazy people out there that are just giving a show and a half. We are not competing with those people because, I don't know about you, but the greatest overstimulant that there is, whether you're a Christian or not, is a cellular phone. They're not called cellular phones anymore. They used to be. Now they are called smartphones. And who buys them? Dummies. Us. I'm included in that myself. They're personal computers, and they're demanding. They don't only give you a lot of information. It's when you had a child, if you're a parent today and you had a child and the baby was crying, you were happy because it was alive. And then when it went quiet, you went to the cot or wherever the baby was sleeping. Maybe you did that. I did this. It's a feel by its nose. Is there any air coming? Is it still breathing? Because it wasn't making a noise. Now we do similar things with a cell phone. We put it aside, and after a while we pick it up to see, is anybody sending me a beep? Is anybody sending me a message? And if they don't, we check through everything just in case. It's called addiction, of course. And children can get addicted to cell or smartphones because it overstimulates their world. So when you say, go and play with your ball, or you say, go for a run, or you say, go and play with a friend, they say, no, that's boring. Have you ever heard children say that? Overstimulated. When we do that in the church, People aren't coming because they love God anymore to church. They're not coming because they want to care for people. They're coming because they want to be overstimulated. And you have to jump over the hoops, and eventually it's impossible. And they say things like, we're not being fed here. Nothing's happening in this church. And they go and seek other pastures. It could just be that they're overstimulated. So I always say, listen, it's good to be relevant. I think we should be definitely relevant as the church. And we should be asking, are we also real? And are we still relational? And so if you ask me, is the church still relevant today? Yes, absolutely. Let me tell you why. Perhaps you disagree. Please tell me why you disagree. I believe the church is relevant today because we are the only institution, and the church is an institution in the world, that is eternal. That's number one. All the other things will die away, but the church is eternal. The second thing is the architect of the church, Jesus, who said, I'm going to build my church. We are the co-workers, laborers with Jesus. What a privilege. That's what makes you and I relevant. We are building as living stones something that's eternal. And then lastly, what makes the church relevant is that it should be real and relational. And so you can answer that question this morning. I believe with all my heart that the church is absolutely relevant. It depends what you want to compare it with. It depends what your expectations are. It depends who you're looking at and what you believe. My name is Jack Vint. You've been watching Timeout. Thank you for watching. If you want to leave a comment, it will be great. If you want to subscribe, it will be awesome. And I just want to tell you God loves you, and I'm going to catch you next week.